Based on Sir Thomas North's 1579 translation of Plutarch's Lives, Julius Caesar is believed to have been written and produced in 1599 and was first published in the First Folio, which means if we didn't have the First Folio, this play could have been lost forever. The play opens with Rome celebrating Julius Caesar's triumphant return from defeating the sons of his military rival Pompey. Later, during the feast of Lupercal, or Lupercalia, which was a pastoral festival celebrated in ancient Rome on February 15th to purify the city, promote health and fertility, Caesar is walking through the celebratory streets when a soothsayer makes their way up to Caesar and delivers the infamous and ominous message, "Beware the Ides of March," a message which Caesar ignores. Now, meanwhile, Cassius, a senator, attempts to convince Brutus to join his conspiracy to assassinate Caesar because he, and along with many others, are fearful of Caesar abusing his power. Brutus, who is friendly with Caesar, is hesitant. Then the two hear from Casca how Marc Antony just offered the crown of Rome to Caesar 3 times, and each time, with a bit more reluctance, Caesar refused it. Now, jumping ahead, on the eve of the Ides of March, so March 14th, the conspirators meet and share forged letters of support from Roman citizens to try to further convince Brutus to join them. Eventually, Brutus concedes and joins the conspiracy, doing so for the greater good because he believes Caesar should be killed in order to prevent him from doing any damage to Rome and its people. On the Ides of March, Caesar ignores both the previous warning from the soothsayer and the premonitions from his own wife Calpurnia and goes to the Senate. Caesar is lured by the other senators and surprised as they stab him to death. And as he falls, Caesar utters his famous dying words, "Et tu, Brute." After hearing about Caesar's death, Marc Antony asks the conspiring senators to allow him to safely speak at Caesar's funeral, as a friend. Now, Brutus says, "You shall, Antony," but Cassius quickly pulls him aside, saying he doesn't think it's a good idea because the people will be so moved by what Marc Antony has to say. Brutus counters this by saying, "Don't worry, he will speak before Marc Antony, and in doing so, he will explain to the people of Rome the reason for Caesar's death." And then he also tells Marc Antony that while he may speak, he cannot speak ill or place any blame on the senators, and must tell the people that the senators are allowing him to speak. Marc Antony agrees to these terms, and when he is left alone, he resolves to try and sway the people with his speech and make them see the truth. And now we get to the monologue. Because Marc Antony's monologue has become so famous and well known in Shakespeare's canon, we tend to forget about Brutus's speech that happens right before. And frankly, so do the Roman people to which these two characters are speaking. When Brutus gives his speech, he begins with, "Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause and be silent that you may hear." Which, if I may say so, is a lot less memorable than the beginning of Marc Antony's speech. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." Brutus's speech is very short and to the point. He chooses to play to the people's logical mind, while Marc Antony instead speaks to the people's emotions. This is further shown by the fact that Brutus speaks in prose and Marc Antony speaks in verse, where the poetry and iambic pentameter, literally called the heartbeat rhythm, perfectly plays to human emotion. Now, Marc Antony is true to his word to Brutus. He tells the people that the senators allowed him to speak. And he also does not speak ill of them. Marc Antony also does what Shakespeare characters do best and riddles his speech with incredible rhetoric, thus making Brutus's conditions work against him. He constantly recalls to the people how Brutus just said Caesar was ambitious and Brutus is an honorable man. So, using logic, if Brutus is honorable, then yes, he must have been telling the truth about Caesar being ambitious. Marc Antony smartly pairs this repetition throughout the speech with personal and emotional stories about Caesar. First, he was my friend, faithful and just to me. And later, he hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill, basically funding the city. Followed by, when the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept, and surely an ambitious man would not show this kind of emotion. And finally, harking back to when he offered the crown to Caesar 3 times at the Lupercalia earlier in the play, and 3 times Caesar did refuse. Was this ambitious? He asks the people. Each time Marc Antony shares one of these stories, it is concluded with a variation of the phrase, Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. And in doing so, he seems to dispute Brutus's claim about Caesar being ambitious and thus needing to be stopped, without ever directly saying so. Marc Antony's power of persuasion is unmatched. Brutus should have listened to Cassius and not let him speak. Because in the end, Marc Antony is able to turn the citizens of Rome against Brutus and the conspirators. Now, one final thing to note about Shakespeare's political thriller is the power of speech and the delicacy of mob mentality. At the beginning of the play, the people of Rome are mocked for changing their allegiance so quickly from Pompey to Caesar. Then, when Brutus speaks to them at Caesar's funeral, they change their allegiance from defending Caesar to agreeing with and following Brutus and the senators. And finally, when Marc Antony concludes his rousing and emotional speech, the people have once again shifted their views and follow Marc Antony, and for the remainder of the play, are against Brutus and the rest. This mob mentality reaches a terrifying climax when a group of citizens meet Cinna the poet in the streets and mistake him for Cinna, one of the conspiring senators. Now, Cinna the poet tells them that he's not the senator. They just have the same name. And the citizens go, meh, and decide to kill him anyway. The people are so frequently persuaded by the words of their politicians, and in doing so, they follow them blindly. That sounds a bit relevant. After you watch this monologue, I encourage you to find Brutus's monologue, also found in Act 3, Scene 2, and compare the two. If you were a citizen of Rome, and you heard these 2 speeches back to back, who would you choose to follow?
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good oft interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercali thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me.